So the other day, I was watching a debate between Christians and atheists. And in this debate, there were two Christians representing the theistic side, and there were two atheists representing the atheistic side. Now, when one of the atheists got up to present his arguments on why God does not exist, he was using the tact by trying to discredit the Bible. His way of doing that was discrediting historical eyewitness accounts, saying that eyewitness accounts are only so good as they can be empirically validated with things that we can test today. So the question is that true? And if not, then is there a filter that certain people are implying over the biblical text that is unnecessary? Now, I'm going to be doing this through the lens of historical eyewitness accounts and see if it is the best explanation. And I'm going to do it using an early church father to kind of buttress this account. So with that said, my name is Daniel Donahue. This is Contextual Christianity, and I'm certainly glad you're here. So yes, we're going to be talking about the reliability of eyewitness accounts, specifically historical eyewitness accounts, and certain philosophies that are applied over these in order to basically, hinder certain aspects of true knowledge. Because as this atheist was saying, to him, eyewitness accounts are only valid so long as there is some form of empirical way of validating them today. As as an analogy, he used something like a fictional item and someone conceptualizing that fictional being and then saying they actually saw that fictional being, and like the tooth fairy. And so, yes, I can conceptualize in my mind the tooth fairy, but to say that I actually saw the tooth fairy, well, that'd be absurd because the tooth fairy cannot be empirically validated. And in that sense, I think that this Occam's razor, or this way of limiting certain things, cutting out a lot of the bad interpretations on what people think, is actually a good thing. But this is a philosophy. This is a philosophy that is applied over and on top of history. This is a philosophy that is good, but at its roots has some naturalistic elements to it. And in many senses, I believe when it comes to understanding the world around us, we have to do it objectively. And I want to do it fair. But I don't want to use philosophies that actually will hinder me from coming to the best logical explanation of an event. And if the best logical explanation of an event is a supernatural element, then I'm not going to limit that because I cannot empirically validate it today. Because that would be actually saying, basically burying my head in the ground, saying, I'm not going to look at the facts on the ground. I'm not going to look at the historical record because my philosophy won't let me. Yeah, that's not fair. That's not fair to those that lived in that time period. That's not fair to the truth. And that's not fair to yourself because realistically, you're limiting the potential of what truly happened. Yes, you want to put up your bumpers to make sure that we aren't falling into the gutter of absurdities. And I'm okay with that. But to create bumpers in a sense so tight that half the lane is blocked off, I'm not okay with that. But guess what? That's not how we do history. We have to look at history and look at not the naturalistic view of history, but the best logical explanation. And if I have a naturalistic lens that I apply over history that prevents me from ever seeing any miracles, well then yeah, I have a problem. Because I'm removing the potential of truth. And here's the thing. When we look at the early church and what is said, the supernatural is the best logical explanation of, what took place. Yes. And I don't have to, I'm not forced to stay in the Bible to make those claims. There's plenty of external evidence to back up that fact. I can go outside, and I'm going to do that. I'm going to go to, well, Quadratus of Athens. And here soon, I'm actually going to be doing several videos on Quadratus of Athens because I find him quite he's a neat guy. He's quite a neat guy. So what exactly is this quote, and how am I going to basically say what I'm going to say? Well, so first, Quadratus is it was considered to be the first apologist, or one of the first Christian apologists inside the church. And he wrote an apology that Jerome talks about, that we have Eusebius talking about, and basically saying it was widespread within the 4th or 5th century at that time period. A lot of people had it. However, most of it is lost to history, or as we presume is lost to history. I'm going to be dealing with that in another video, is do we actually have the lost apology of Quadratus? I think possibly, and it's been right under our nose this entire time. But Quadratus wrote things, a lot of things, and it's most of it we can't 100% verify is his, but there is one quote that we do have that was preserved by Eusebius in his church history. And this quote is pretty profound. And so I'm going to read the context of the quote around it, and then I'm going to kind of see exactly what is being expressed. So here we go. So the quote is, so this is the quote that is found by Eusebius. Eusebius quotes this. So after Trajan had reigned for 19 and a half years, Hadrian became his successor to the empire. To him, Quadratus addressed a discourse containing an apology for our religion, because certain wicked men had attempted to trouble the Christians. The work is still in the hands of a great many of the brethren, as also in our own, and furnishes a clear proof of the man's understanding of his apostolic authority and apostolic orthodoxy. He himself reveals the early date at which he lived in the following words. So this is Quadratus. This is a quote from Quadratus, preserved by Eusebius. But the work of our Savior were always present, for they were genuine. Those that were healed and those that were raised from the dead, who were seen not only when they were healed and when they were raised up, but were also always present. And not merely while the Savior was on earth, but also after his death. They were alive for quite a while, so that some of them lived even to our day. So most people that understand Quadratus, they basically believe that he wrote this somewhere around 117 to 138 based upon the internal and external evidences of this quote. Some place it around 120. But the thing is, he is an early Christian apologist, and he's speaking, well, matter-of-factly. So what atheists and those that are taking I would say non-historical philosophy of naturalism, which basically removes any element of the supernatural from history or from an eyewitness account being legitimate, removing that, by doing that, they cannot take this quote seriously. They cannot take it seriously. And yet, when we look at the rapid growth of the church, and we see quotes like this, well, the supernatural is the best logical explanation. Why? Well, several factors. Where did the Christians start their church? In Jerusalem, the surrounding area of Jerusalem. That's important. This quote being around 120, Jerome basically says Quadratus is also a student of the disciples or the apostles, so he knew the apostles, and there's other external evidence that I think actually verifies that. I will get to that into another video. Pretty awesome. But he was a disciple of the apostles. He wrote during a time period where those that were healed or raised from the dead were still alive during the time that he wrote. So There we have eyewitness accounts. And the reason I say that this is a valid form of garnishing knowledge is the fact that, well, when it comes to understanding how the fact that the church was in Jerusalem, the fact that the church exploded, grew at a rapid pace in Jerusalem and the surrounding areas, and there's quotes like this, well, those are historical facts. Those are historical things that have been written down that we know. If none of this was true, that no supernatural event took place, the enemies of Christ, well, they would have said something. They would have. There were plenty of enemies of the Christians. And they were outside of the Roman Empire. Internal and external. Later on, I mean, you have the Talmud that has certain things that were written that basically makes contributes of what took place, who Jesus was, from a non-sympathetic light. But they do not doubt the miracles in those accounts. Why? Because, as Quadratus says, they were genuine. They were always present. So they were always present. Genuine. How can we validate it? Oh, you know the guy down that road? Yeah, he was raised from the dead by Jesus. He was that other person, he was healed by leprosy. He's older now, but go talk to him. Go talk to them. The time period that they lived in, people lived in communities that were a lot more tight-knit than they are today. If there was a man born blind and he was healed from being born blind, you could validate that based upon not just his account, but the account of the community. If the enemies of Christ wanted to do that, if none of this was true, they could have, but they didn't. Why? Because, as Quadratus says, these things were genuine. And that is why we have the explosion of growth in the first few centuries. Because there were these eyewitness accounts. And so let's look at all the data. We have the eyewitness accounts basically lining up with the historical record at the rapid growth of Christianity. We have no account of those basically saying that the works of Jesus Christ were not miraculous. In fact, we have non-sympathetic views that indicate that something miraculous took place. So, okay, we can apply the naturalistic lens that is unnaturally forced upon the historical record by limiting and removing miracles because we cannot verify them in an empirical test tube. I'm sorry, that's basically scientism being applied onto history. Okay, you can have your white coat priesthood over there, but do not bring it into the historical field because it's not natural. I know you want to make everything empirical because, well, you frankly don't believe in God, but I'm sorry. When we look at the facts at hand, okay, let's try to do it. Let's apply this naturalistic lens. Okay, how did we get that explosion of the early church? Why do we have a quote like this? Why are there not enemies? What is the explanation? What explanation do you have that I can, as a Christian who basically is applying the data, putting it down, trying to say, okay, this plus this plus this, where do the dice fall? Where does the things fall? Where does it land? I look at all of it and I don't see any way that you can have a naturalistic explanation for this quote. What naturalistic explanation? You have an early 2nd century quote that speaks of the miracles of Jesus Christ and speaks to the fact that those that witnessed the miracles of Christ were still present at his day. So basically saying there is a long history of these people proclaiming that Christ did miraculous things. Well, you can say it's a forgery. You can dismiss it. You can basically say, well, that's not reliable because Eusebius got other things wrong. Well, one of the things we're seeing from this is a quote. He's getting a quote from a credible source that multiple people are saying Quadratus is a credible witness. So you have to doubt multiple testimonies now. And Quadratus is only backing up other eyewitness accounts supporting that. I can lean on other accounts other than Quadratus. Another one is that very early proto-creed that is found in 1 Corinthians chapter 15. What's taking place up there? 1 Corinthians chapter 15. It basically says this takes place as it is written. This takes place. And then Jesus rose from the dead and then witnessed to 500 plus. And we know how often or how they actually counted people is usually they counted males. So on top of the 500, which were probably predominantly or most likely just males, there could have been whole families or swoosh of other people that were with them at that time period. So it's not just 500. There's potentially 1,000 right there in that one witness. And that's Christ witnessed at one time to over 500, most likely males, which is a huge testimony. So huge right there. Over 500, one. And he witnessed for 40 days. And I'm guessing, well, that's part of the reason why people believed in Jesus Christ. At the extent that they were dying. They were willing to die. They were willing to become Roman candles, burned alive in the palace of Nero because they had eyewitness accounts. Okay, I'm sorry. I don't know of anybody that would be willing to die for a lie. I'm sorry. I don't know. And I mean, not a lie that would make them look better, but a lie that everybody hates them for. I don't know anybody. It's not a thing that happens. People do not do that. They'll die for a lie that someone else believes in or that they've taught. And it's, if you believe something that is wrong, obviously you've been given false information. But if you personally know that something is wrong and you're willing to die, well, yeah. No, it doesn't line up. Sorry, man. It doesn't line up. So what is my point here? My point is we have good evidence that miracles took place. And when we try to use a philosophical way of gathering knowledge, a type of epistemology, we're using an epistemological way of interpreting history that discounts certain things because it's not naturalistic or because you personally cannot verify it, well, I'm sorry, that's arrogant. That's just a bunch of modern arrogance. You are on top of your ivory tower, preaching down, looking back at history and basically saying, truth can only be gathered by the way that I want truth to be gathered. Not by the way that you believe truth was validated, by the way that I. So you become a skeptic that is bigger than history itself. And so therefore, you're applying a system to interpret the world around you that discounts the best logical explanation for many events that have taken place in the past. And that's rather unfortunate. Or we can recognize that eyewitness accounts are a valid form of garnishing reality. And that when we apply Occam's razor and we remove all the other explanations, yes, we have a valid way of gathering information. So with all that said, we should look for where the truth is. Yes, if a naturalistic explanation is the best, then we should go for it. But if it's not, we should not have a philosophy placed on top of our worldview that prevents us from seeing the simple, basic truth around us. And it's as simple as that. So hopefully this was helpful. I plan on actually doing several videos on Quadratus and why I personally love the little known church father, apostolic father of Quadratus, and how we possibly actually have his apology today. And it's been under our nose for a few hundred years. So if that's something you're interested in, more church history stuff, then this is Contextual Christianity. Have a good day.